The monitor screamed a flatline warning at 2:47 in the morning, and Nurse Adeline Voss froze for exactly 1 second before her training took over, because the man dying on that gurney was the most feared crime boss in the entire city, and every single doctor on the floor had just refused to touch him. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that every human life deserves a fighting chance no matter what they've done, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us you're watching, and subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales so you never miss a story like this one. And before we go any further, we would love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. Type your city or country in the comments below. Now, let's step into Adeline's world. Adeline Voss was 29 years old, 5 years into her nursing career at Meridian General, a woman who had built her entire identity around one simple belief, that a hospital bed made everyone equal. She had grown up in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night, and she remembered the nights her mother came home with blistered hands and a tired smile, telling her that the only thing that mattered in this life was whether you showed up for people when it counted. That lesson had carried Adeline through nursing school on scholarships and double shifts, through the exhaustion of the pandemic years, through every heartbreak of losing patients she had grown to love. She believed in her work the way some people believe in scripture. So when the doors of the emergency room burst open that night and 4 men in dark coats carried in a bleeding, gasping figure, Adeline did not think about who he was. She saw a gunshot wound tearing through the abdomen of a man named Salvatore Marchetti, a name that made security guards nervous and made half the hospital administration reach for their phones. Marchetti was not just any patient. He was the head of a criminal empire that had, according to rumor and half-buried news reports, ordered the deaths of rivals, bribed judges, and turned entire city blocks into his personal territory. He was the kind of man whose name alone could empty a room. Within minutes, hospital administrator Gerald Whitfield stormed onto the floor, his face pale with fear rather than concern. He pulled the attending physician aside and gave an order that would haunt Adeline for the rest of her career: stabilize him just enough to transfer him elsewhere, but do not commit hospital resources, do not call in the trauma surgeon on call, and above all, do not let this become the hospital's problem. The official reasoning, whispered through gritted teeth, was liability, fear of retaliation from rival gangs, fear of scrutiny from federal investigators already circling Marchetti's empire, fear that treating him would paint a target on the hospital itself. The trauma surgeon, a cautious man nearing retirement, quietly agreed and stepped back, leaving Marchetti's care to a skeleton crew who moved with obvious reluctance. Adeline stood at the foot of that gurney and watched a man bleed out while the people who had sworn oaths to save lives found reasons to look away. She could hear his ragged breathing, see the sweat beading on his forehead, watch his hands trembling not from cruelty but from sheer human fear of dying. Whatever he had done outside these walls, in this moment he was simply a person whose heart was failing, and every fiber of her training screamed that walking away was a betrayal of everything she had built her life on. She checked his vitals herself. Blood pressure crashing. Pulse thready and irregular. Internal bleeding that would kill him within the hour without intervention. She paged the on-call surgeon 3 times and got no response. She marched to Whitfield's office and begged him to reconsider, reminding him that turning away a dying patient violated the very oath the hospital was built on, but Whitfield's answer was cold and final: "This conversation is over, Nurse Voss, and if you interfere, you will lose your license and your job by morning." Adeline walked back to that room with Whitfield's threat still ringing in her ears, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at a dying stranger surrounded by silence instead of urgency. She thought of her mother's blistered hands. She thought of every patient she had ever held while they cried, rich or poor, saint or sinner. And she made a decision that would change the course of her life. She grabbed a crash cart, called for a junior surgical resident named Priya Anand who she trusted, and began working on Marchetti herself, applying pressure to the wound, starting a transfusion line, shouting instructions with a steadiness that surprised even her. Priya hesitated only a moment before joining her, whispering that they would both be finished if this went wrong. Adeline told her that some things mattered more than being finished. Together, in defiance of direct orders, the two women fought to keep a mafia boss alive through the longest 90 minutes of Adeline's career, using equipment they were told not to touch, borrowing blood units meant for another department, and improvising surgical steps neither of them had been formally cleared to perform alone. Outside the room, security guards paced nervously, aware that 4 armed men were waiting in the hallway, men who would not react kindly if their boss died on that table. Whitfield hovered by the nurse's station, torn between calling security to physically remove Adeline and the terrifying possibility that doing so might get someone killed. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire: the reckless nurse, the one risking her entire career for a man who did not deserve saving, according to the whispers rippling through the break room. If this story is stirring something in you right now, we would be so grateful if you could like this video and leave a comment, even just a single word, because it helps this story reach more people who need a little reminder that compassion doesn't ask permission. Inside that room, Adeline's hands did not shake even once. She had seen death close in on patients before, and she recognized the exact moment when a body begins to give up. Marchetti's blood pressure dipped dangerously low, his lips turning a pale shade of blue, and for a few unbearable seconds, Adeline thought she had lost him. She leaned close to his ear, the way she did with every frightened patient, and told him he was not allowed to die on her watch, that whatever waited for him outside these walls could wait a little longer. Something about her voice, steady and unafraid, seemed to reach him even through the fog of pain, and his vitals began to climb back, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. By the time the sun rose over the city, Salvatore Marchetti was stable, breathing on his own, his wound closed and his color returning. Priya collapsed into a chair in the hallway, emotionally and physically drained, while Adeline sat beside Marchetti's bed simply watching him breathe, feeling the strange, quiet satisfaction of having done the one thing she knew was right even when everyone told her it was wrong. Word of what happened reached Whitfield within the hour, and true to his threat, he suspended Adeline pending termination, citing insubordination and unauthorized use of hospital resources. Adeline did not argue. She had known the cost when she made her choice, and she accepted it with the same quiet dignity she brought to every shift. She packed her things from her locker that morning while colleagues avoided her eyes, some out of fear of association, others out of a shame they could not quite name. But something Whitfield had not accounted for was Marchetti himself. When he regained enough strength to speak, one of his men told him everything: how the hospital administration had ordered him abandoned, how 2 women had defied direct orders to save his life, how the nurse who fought hardest for him had just lost her job for it. Marchetti, a man rarely moved by anything, asked to see her. Adeline returned to the hospital not as an employee but as a visitor, uncertain what to expect from a man whose reputation preceded him into every room. She found him sitting up in bed, weaker than before but alert, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her hold her ground rather than shrink from it. He asked her why she had done it, knowing exactly who he was, knowing what it would cost her. Adeline answered honestly, that she had not been thinking about who he was, only about the fact that a human being was dying in front of her and she had sworn to fight for that, regardless of the name attached to it. Marchetti was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that seemed to carry the weight of a man re-evaluating everything he thought he understood about the world. He told her that in his life, kindness was almost always a transaction, a favor extended in expectation of return, and that he had long stopped believing anyone did anything without an angle. Adeline told him she was not asking for anything, that she had simply done her job the way she believed it should be done, and that losing her position was a price she had already made peace with. What Marchetti did next surprised the entire hospital staff. He did not offer her money, at least not directly, though he quietly ensured her family would never struggle with medical bills again. Instead, he used his influence, the same influence that had once terrified administrators, to fund an entire new charitable wing at Meridian General, a trauma center built specifically to ensure that no patient, regardless of their past, their reputation, or their ability to pay, would ever again be turned away in their most desperate hour. He insisted the wing be named not after himself, but after the nurse who had refused to look away, and he personally requested that Adeline be reinstated with a formal apology from the very administration that had tried to end her career. Whitfield, faced with a wealthy donor's conditions and a public relations disaster of his own making, had little choice but to comply. Adeline returned to Meridian General not as a disgraced nurse but as the woman whose courage had reshaped hospital policy, whose story spread quietly through the medical community as an example of what true compassion looked like when it was tested under the harshest conditions. Priya, too, was celebrated rather than punished, her willingness to stand beside her friend becoming its own quiet lesson in loyalty. In the months that followed, Marchetti's own life took an unexpected turn. Some say a brush with death changes a man in ways that violence and money never could, and whether or not he ever truly left his old world behind, those closest to him noticed a shift, a stranger, softer version of a man who had once been defined only by fear. He visited the hospital wing bearing his adopted name more than once, not as a boss surveying his investment, but almost like a man returning to the place where, in some small way, he had been given permission to imagine a different kind of life. Adeline never sought recognition for what she did. She still works the night shift at Meridian General, still holds the hands of frightened patients regardless of who they are or what they've done, still believes, as her mother once told her, that showing up for people is the only thing that truly matters in this life. But every nurse who walks past the small plaque on that trauma wing's entrance is reminded of a night when one woman decided that a hospital bed makes everyone equal, and that courage sometimes looks less like a grand gesture and more like simply refusing to walk away. We would love to know, did this story touch your heart tonight? If it did, please take just a moment to like this video, and if you have a second, leave a comment telling us what part moved you most. Your comments truly mean the world to this channel and help these stories reach the people who need them. And before you go, we have one special request. Please, drop a comment below sharing what you would have done in Adeline's position, because your voice, your story, and your perspective are exactly what makes this community so special. If this story left you feeling something, whether it was hope, inspiration, or a reminder that kindness always finds its way back to us, please subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales, share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and join us for the next story, because somewhere out there, another act of quiet courage is waiting to be told.